everybody. This is Dr. Lori Shemek.
And I'm Omar Cumberbatch. You're listening to This Podcast Burns Fat. Hey, Lori, how are you today?
Hi, Omar. Doing great. How's everything over there in New York?
Yeah, pretty good. It's just hot, we're just getting through the summer months, and yeah, it is what it is. I can't complain. The last couple of years have been really nice. So this summer we're kind of going back to the good old New York days where it's just hot, humid, sticky. So
Join the club.
yeah.
Join my side of the world. Yeah, I know
I
how it
know.
feels. So what else is hot is our guest today, Stephen Perrine, and he is the author of the new book, The Full Body Fat Fix. And he shows in the interview and in his book how a diverse microbiome will result in a leaner, healthier, more athletic body, and how it can improve your mental health as well as your physical health. So he talks about how it takes only 1 week to change your microbiome, and he really supports it with a lot of research and just little steps here and there. I thought he was great.
Yeah, no, I thought he was great as well. Definitely a fascinating topic, and especially how quick you can really turn your microbiome around. So,
Mhm.
yeah, let's jump into it.
All right.
Hey, Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great, Omar. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hi, Stephen. So happy you're here.
Thanks, Lori. Great to be
Mr.
here.
Stephen Perrine, correct? I
Correcto.
don't want to mess up your name. People do that to me all the time.
Yeah.
So we're happy you're here today because you're going to talk about your new book, The Full Body Fat Fix, and your other book, which was a New York Times best-selling book, The Whole Body Reset. So that's a great background for this book, even though you've done a whole lot more. But today we're going to be talking about the full body fat fix and what that is. And if you could just give us a little bit, just a little, maybe just, you say we aren't fat, but rather inflamed. If you could just maybe clarify that to start with.
Sure. Well, I think that we've started to classify obesity as a disease, and that's a great way of thinking about it when it comes to helping people get over the idea of fat shaming, and the guilt that can come with feeling overweight. But I think a more productive and better way to think of being fat is not as a disease. Obesity is not a disease. It is a symptom of a disease. And that disease is chronic inflammation. It's the same disease that causes or plays a large role in everything from diabetes to heart disease, from arthritis to Alzheimer's, from certain forms of cancer to several autoimmune diseases. Obesity is essentially an inflammatory condition. And so when we try to just treat obesity by just trying to lose weight, what we're doing really is we're trying to stop a burning house by turning on the air conditioner. We're not addressing the actual source of the fire, which is the inflammation that is fueling that obesity. So I wanted to take a deep dive into not just where inflammation is coming from, its link to obesity, and how we can turn the tide. My primary point with the book, and I started off right at the bat, is to say, you're not fat, you're on fire.
Oh, great.
Okay. We should not look, if you had hay fever, which is a condition caused by autoimmune reaction, and you had sniffling and watery eyes, you wouldn't call yourself a crybaby. So why, if you have obesity, which is a symptom of the very same thing, why would you call yourself fat?
I love
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that, and I got to give Lori a lot of props because that's actually how I met Lori with her original book, or I shouldn't say it's the original book, but at least most popular in my mind was the Fat Formation book, and I've always been fascinated by that concept. I think Lori lays it out well, but I would love to see how it actually looks, and if you could make a description of how it actually looks and why it makes us appear to be overweight and obese.
So the biomechanics are basically that as we start to gain a little bit of weight, our fat cells become a little stressed. Fat cells can't duplicate themselves like many of the cells in the body can. So as we eat a little bit too much, we exercise maybe a little bit too little, our calorie intake starts to outweigh our calorie output, and we gain a little bit of that normal weight. Those fat cells begin to grow and they begin to swell. Well, if that continues, they become distressed, and the body responds by sending autoimmune cells into the fatty tissue. This is what happens when you see your belly start to expand and you get that kind of hard beer belly look, right?
Mm-hmm.
That visceral fat can be as much as 10% autoimmune cells in a relatively lean person. Once you get into serious obesity, as much as 40% of the fat is not fat cells, it's autoimmune cells.
Isn't that something? That is just staggering to me.
So we're literally seeing, if you're looking at a swollen belly, you're literally seeing not just fat, but you're also seeing an autoimmune response that's causing the fatty tissue itself to expand.
That is unbelievable. Yeah, and also the belly is an issue that you write about in your new book, The Full Body Fat Fix. We can actually go into that right now if you'd like. And just one section you have is the anatomy of a pot belly, which it's, I think I love the way you just shaped it up, essentially saying that the pot belly isn't your friend and it's not just normal fat.
Right, exactly. It's an autoimmune response. Fat is healthy for us. Fat
Hmm.
is there for a reason. Fat helps control our hormones. It helps control insulin. It keeps our brain healthy. The brain's primarily fat. But as it becomes distressed, it becomes inflamed, and that's where obesity originates from. The fatty tissue is the largest endocrine organ in the body. And so just like you could have a kidney disease or a heart disease, obesity is fat disease.
That's fascinating. I wanted to also mention about that, the growth of the fat cells, and I've heard this a long time. I'd love to see if it was just an urban legend or there's actually uh, some truth to it. I've heard that the fat cells can't like they can only shrink and they can't divide. Is that correct?
Right. So the fat cells don't divide like most of the cells in the body do. They
Okay.
can swell. So as you continue to gain weight, those fat cells are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and swollen. And one of the reasons why being obese is so bad for our health is that the lipids within the cells begin to leak out and get into the bloodstream.
So you basically can only shrink them and you can't eliminate them.
You Well, you can't really eliminate, well, you eventually you do begin to grow new fat cells as stem cells begin to, as the body begins to panic and direct its stem cells to become fat cells because you have so many lipids that you need to store. But typically, with the fat cells that you're born with, or that you developed as you age into adulthood, that's the amount of cells you're supposed to have that you should have.
Okay, I can understand. Thanks.
So with this fat that we keep gaining, and generally it becomes a real problem midlife onward, right? And
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And so would you say that the main culprit would be food that we eat and the refined foods versus the whole foods, which I know
Well,
we all know what you're going to say.
sure. I mean, look, the average woman in today's America weighs more than the average man did during the Kennedy administration.
Wow.
So,
Seriously.
so it can't be just that we're all just became like,
Refined gluttons.
right, gluttons, right? Like that doesn't
Right.
make sense. That was one thing that kind of got me really curious about why this obesity epidemic just suddenly sparks. And honestly, it really just sparked in the late 80s and early 90s, right? That's when suddenly you begin to see something.
I mean,
And
it's rampant. You mentioned it's 4 out of 10
I mean,
people in the
I've
US.
seen as many as 6 out of 10,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
But something else happened at that same time in the early 90s, which is that prior to that, obesity was an equal opportunity offender. So it didn't matter what your wealth or social status was, your risk of obesity was the same. But that changed in the 90s, in the early 90s. Today, the best indicator of whether or not you are obese is what zip code you live in. In counties where people make $45,000, where the average is 40, household income is $45,000 or less, you are far more likely to be obese than if you live in a county where the average household income is 65,000 or more.
So I have a quick question for that because I think that's ooh, that's a good one. So I
Right.
wanted to expand it because I'm thinking of two scenarios. Is it because that income level doesn't have access to better food, or it's because they're stressed out because they don't have any money?
Well, it's a lot of things, but those are the two primary things, right?
Okay.
So, so just as I started looking through this, and I started thinking about this idea of income and weight gain and how they could possibly be related, because if you think about it intellectually, it doesn't really make sense because calories cost money. So
Hmm.
why wouldn't people who have more money be heavier, right? That's number one. Number two, if you look at um,
It's
where
access, I think,
well, yeah,
is
but think about this also. If you look at, for example, McDonald, remember the night in the late 90s, it was this um Super Size Me and all of this push like people
hmm
suing McDonald's for making them fat.
right.
Well, and it was like, oh, because it's so loaded with calories. Well, the reality is that the average fast food meal is considerably lower in calories than the average sit down, mid-price chain restaurant. And that mid-price chain restaurant is considerably lower in calories than a high-end fancy restaurant. So literally, the cheaper the food, the lower the calories. So again, why aren't richer people getting more fat and those with lower incomes?
Well, I know you're not asking directly, but doesn't a lot of it have to do with the type of calorie, for example?
And the quality
So,
of food, yeah.
Right.
yeah.
It's the type of food. It's the type of food. So specifically, when the less expensive food is typically ultra processed food. So
hmm
when we eat ultra processed food, um, because it's had so much of the fiber and the nutrients stripped out, you can almost think about ultra processed food as pre-digested food. So you're eating this food that's been so milled and processed that once it gets into your body, it's very quickly absorbed. It's digested in the stomach or in the small intestine. It never gets down into the large intestine. And that's really important because in the large intestine is where 100 trillion of your best friends live. It's called your microbiome, your gut microbiome. And your gut microbiome competes with you for calories. So a recent study showed that when people ate a diet of processed foods versus a diet of whole foods, and the calories were the same, the people who ate the processed food could absorb up to 400 more calories
Yeah.
per day because that food goes right into your body. Whereas when you eat whole foods, that goes through the entire digestive process down into the colon where the microbiome attacks it and eats it. And
That
guess
is
what
so.
else happens when we eat processed foods? You know that processed foods are inflammatory. But why? Well, because the microbiome is the primary controller of inflammation. So if you eat processed foods, you're starving your microbiome. So the microbiome isn't healthy. It's not helping to control inflammation. And so you're number one, consuming more calories for the same amount of calories that you eat. And number two, triggering inflammation because you're starving your microbiome.
That is fascinating. And, you know, suffice it to say, all those bugs that, you know, the gut bugs that are eating whatever we eat, if we're eating a diet of refined foods such as sugar or white flour, that's what they love and they thrive on. And we create an abundance and you know, there's an imbalance, correct, of
Right. Well, remember
healthy.
about 85% of the microbes in your gut are healthy microbes. They're good for you. 85%. They're creating stuff like serotonin, which is the thing that antidepressants are supposed to boost. They're creating oxytocin, which is the love hormone. The healthier your microbiome, the less depression you have, the less anxiety you have, the better you sleep, because it has such an action on the brain. They're creating enzymes and fatty acids that help to control blood pressure and cholesterol. They're doing uncountable number of good things for you when they're healthy. But when you starve them, what happens is that the diversity of that ecosystem, I call it the Yosemite of you, the diversity of that ecosystem is diminished. And a lot of the bad guys can start to take over. It's sort of like if you have a comedy club and you have 100 people and you have a couple of drunk hecklers, they're not going to make as much of an impact as if you only have 3 people in the comedy club. So those bad actors, which can be things like H. pylori, which causes ulcers, or E. coli, you've heard plenty about that, they start to get a toehold and inflammation begins to set in. One of the things that happens in the colon is that the lining of the colon becomes inflamed. If you think about if you brush your teeth and you see a little blood when you brush your teeth, that's inflammation in the gums. Well, the same thing is happening in your colon, and it's allowing particles of these bacteria and other microbes, as well as enzymes and other things you don't want to leak out into your blood system to go through the lining of the gut and into your blood system, and that's causing system-wide inflammation.
So as far as foods, right? We definitely understand that the processed foods are irritants and they're causing and wreaking havoc. What about the ones that actually assist us in actually getting this back to where it needs to be?
Well, a study from the American Gut Project found that those who have the healthiest and most diverse microbiomes are people who eat at least 30 different plants every week. That sounds like it might be a big number. It's really not. The average person probably eats, the average health conscious person probably eats close to that, maybe in the low to mid 20s. But what happens to a lot of us is that we get hooked on this idea of superfoods. And believe me, I've been involved in enough diet projects to know that superfoods are super exciting. If you just tell me eat blueberries, almonds, and oatmeal every day, fantastic. I got it nailed. No thinking involved. Boom. The problem is that if you eat one kind of food with one kind of fiber, you only feed one kind of microbe. See,
That
we
is so
evolved,
important.
right?
Yeah.
Our microbiome evolved with us. So when researchers went into caves of Paleolithic man and found leftover Paleolithic feces, or as you and I know it, caveman poop, What they found was that evidence of like 55 different kinds of plants that, as well as, enormous variety of microbes. And today, so on Earth today, there are about 50,000 edible plants. About 2/3 of the plants that Americans eat are made up of just three species: wheat, corn, and rice.
Oh, no.
Of the vegetables we eat, 50% are two species: potatoes and tomatoes.
Wow.
So we've limited the number and variety of plants that we eat so dramatically that we're completely starving our microbiomes and creating this imbalance. And that's why gut health is such a concern and why leaky gut is such a concern, because we're not taking care of our best friends. They're there to take care of us, to control inflammation, to make us feel happy, to keep our weight down, to protect us against disease, and we're starving them.
You
So,
know,
I'm sorry
oh, go
though.
ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
as you were speaking, we've had so many different types of guests who are basically in camps, right? So we have carnivores, vegetarians, vegans, and all these things. The way that you're describing it, any strict way of eating in that perspective is going to be problematic for our gut because we just are not getting enough diversity. Is that accurate? And is that maybe going to be an issue down the road?
A lot of restrictive eating programs are pretty bad ideas.
Mhm.
Obviously, if you're a vegetarian or vegan and you're really plant focused, I mean, I think a plant forward approach is best with enough protein, especially as we get
Mhm.
older. And I'll go into that in a little bit. But anybody who's doing um, anything that restricts the kinds of variety of food that you're eating, it's very damaging to the microbiome. It's one of my problems with anything from keto to paleo to intermittent fasting, is that you're restricting the foods that your microbiome needs to thrive and keep you healthy. Um, I've done all of these diets because I've written about them. And the ironic thing about paleo, for example, is that some advocates think that like if you just eat chicken and pork and beef and don't eat grains and legumes and certain fruits, that you're eating like Paleolithic man. And that's not true, because there weren't chickens or pigs or cows when Paleolithic man was around. If you want to eat like a Paleolithic man, go into your backyard, turn over a rock, and whatever crawls out, eat it. Because that's how cavemen ate.
Well, I have to commend you on your list. You have this incredible list in your book, 50 ways to add 100 plus plants. And it's just brilliant. We know that you about sneaking ground flaxseed into your batter, or multigrain bread, loaded, it says, with which in Dave's Killer Bread, which I've never had, comes loaded with 21 different whole grains and seeds, including
Mhm.
whole wheat, flax, sunflower seeds, sesame, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. But anyway, you give a smoothie idea of that uses 6 different types of plants, and a couple pages worth. So it's just that alone. If somebody's trying to add more plants, you don't need to add, eh, you know, complete list of them, but here and there would be great, I think.
Right. I mean, the idea is not to hide under the table when the pizza arrives. The idea is to make sure that there's some plants on that pizza, right? Why not
Right.
get fresh garlic and mushrooms and broccoli? Why not, if you like soup, why not get the 12 bean soup instead of the black bean soup? If you like nuts, why not get the mixed nuts rather than the peanuts? If you
Mm-hmm.
like salad, get a mixed a spring mix instead of just kale or just romaine or
Great
just
tip.
spinach. Um,
Love it.
and it does not need to be in any way expensive.
Like mushroom crisps and cauliflower crisps for crackers.
Yeah, I mean, those could
Yeah.
be fun, but it can
Dried
also be
seaweed. Yeah.
as simple as like, what do you like, right? So
Yes,
when
exactly. That's
I
really the
have
most important.
I have a full day of eating that allows you that you could consume 30 plants in one day. And it's a smoothie, a steak sandwich, a pizza appetizer, a pasta dish, and a dessert.
I think people are running to your house.
Well, I prefer they order my book,
Yeah.
but I have some leftovers.
But so since you mentioned protein, can you tell us why it's so important? And you mentioned especially in the morning.
Sure. So if you make a muscle, bend your arm, make a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
That bicep right there, that represents about 5% of your total skeletal muscle. That's how
5%.
about 5% of your total skeletal muscle is that one bicep. That's how much you lose every decade after age 30. So by the time you turn 50, that's 2 armloads of muscle. And every decade after that, you're dropping more and more muscle. And the reason is because as we get older, we develop something called anabolic resistance. So when my daughter, who's 16, eats an egg, which has 6 grams of protein, her body immediately goes, let's start making muscle out of that, because our bodies are constantly breaking down and building up muscle. It's constantly being torn down and rebuilt. If I eat that one egg for breakfast, my body is going to be like, I can't do
That's
anything
it.
with this. That's it. Because as I've gotten older, I have developed anabolic resistance, an inability to easily turn protein into muscle. So we need the way to overcome anabolic resistance is to increase the amount of protein that we're eating to approximately 25 to 30 grams at each meal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the special sauce where you just basically press that make muscle button, right? When we're
And you would
young,
say anyone over 40, right, to do that?
yeah, definitely anyone over 40, sure. And it gets more important as we get older, because our anabolic resistance increases. So that would be if you're eating 25 to 30 grams of protein at each meal and you eat 3 meals, that's about 90 grams of protein. That's about what the average American eats today, right? The problem
Mm-hmm.
is that the average American eats about 60% of that at dinner and about 10% of it at breakfast. So even if you have breakfast, and even if you have a healthy breakfast of those superfoods, right, with oatmeal and blueberries and almonds, you're not getting anywhere near that number.
Oh,
So if you start your day with less than 25 to 30 grams of protein, and the exact amount depends on your body size, a little bit more if you're a linebacker, a little bit less if you're a ballerina. If you start your day with that amount, then you are going to be in muscle maintenance mode all day. But if you eat less than that to start your day, you're going to be in muscle loss mode all day.
hmm. So you clearly are not a fan of the intermittent fasting, I see.
It is,
Can
remember
be
that
muscle wasting.
almost all weight loss programs are in fact muscle loss programs, because our body wants to hold on to fat and it wants to shed muscle. So if you try to lose weight by cutting calories, and that's what intermittent fasting is, your body is going to shed muscle before it sheds fat. And your body is going to lower its metabolism because it senses starvation coming. And that becomes permanent because metabolism can only go down, it cannot go up. Metabolism cannot go up. If someone tells you they have a metabolism boosting diet, they don't know what they are talking about.
Well said. So can you tell us in your program, the Full Body Fat Fix, how it can save our lives, quote unquote?
Well, as I mentioned, the microbiome is the master controller of inflammation. So studies show that people with higher levels of inflammation are more likely to develop diabetes, which is an inflammatory disease, Alzheimer's, which is an inflammatory disease. Maybe it's disputable right now, but a lot of researchers are looking at inflammation as the primary driver of Alzheimer's. Heart disease has inflammatory aspects to it. Some forms of cancer are inflammatory diseases. COPD is an inflammatory disease. Fatty liver, which is, by the way, the number 5 killer of people in their 50s today,
Wow. And
is
children have it too now.
yes, and that is an inflammatory disease. And that's, by the way, that's non-alcoholic fatty liver, right? So
Right.
that's not from drinking, it's from obesity. That's an inflammatory disease. So in all of these ways, feeding your microbiome in the way that I'm outlining in the book will help to prevent those issues as well as helping to prevent obesity. A lot of people will say, a lot of doctors will tell you, you need to lose weight in order to be healthier. And my point is, no, you need to be healthier in order to lose weight.
Yes, thank you. Well said. That is actually the way it should be stated, just like that.
And the studies that connect our microbiome to things like depression and
Mhm.
anxiety are unbelievable. Antidepressant SSRIs also happen to be anti-inflammatory, by the way. Inflammation levels can also be raised by stress. So talk therapy can be anti-inflammatory.
Oh, interesting.
But again, it's a matter of the effect of the microbiome on the brain, which is really powerful. Inflammation raises your risk of anxiety, of alcoholism, by the way. There are comparisons between people with alcohol use disorder and those without, showing that those with alcohol use disorder have compromised microbiomes. In fact, how competitive you are at any given sport is determined by your microbiome. Elite athletes have healthier and more diverse microbiomes than just regular fit people.
Interesting. That makes sense. Yeah. And also being outside helps promote, if you're so inclined, a healthier microbiome.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
We're so hygienic now. I mean, one thing I will not touch is antibacterial soaps.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Same.
created a world that is absolutely hostile to our microbiome, with all of the disinfectants, but think about it, pesticides, fungicides, what do these do? Well, they kill microbes. Antibiotics, your risk of developing diabetes skyrockets if you use antibiotics on a regular basis.
Glyphosate. That's just a whole nother topic, but
Glyphosate, also known as
yeah,
Roundup, yes.
right. Yeah.
It's banned in most of the world.
Mm-hmm.
A study of farmers found that those who used the most pesticides were the most likely to be obese.
Wow.
So we're eating food that's raised with these things. We're consuming antibiotics every time we get a stuffy nose, even though that's caused by a virus, not a bacterium. And we're sterilizing ourselves into oblivion.
Wow, this is a lot of information, and it was very
Yes.
well put. So, Steve, you've been fantastic. We want to give you an opportunity to show us where we can keep up with all the great information that you're providing on a regular basis, including your social media handles, your website, and of course, where to get this book, because it's a really helpful book, and I think it's going to help tons of people.
Sure. Well, the Full Body Fat Fix comes out on May 21st, available where all fine books are sold, of course. And for more information, you can go to my website, which is stephenperrine.com, where you can order the book, find out some more about that, and see some of my media appearances. And also, if you'd like to learn more, I'm doing a virtual appearance at the 92nd Street Y in New York
Oh,
City.
yeah. Congratulations. I did that once.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's lovely.
So
That's
much fun.
May
Yeah.
21st. I think it's like $10 maybe. But we'll have an hour-long conversation with gastroenterologist Dr. Roshini Raj. And we're going to be talking about the microbiome in full. And it's going to be pretty fascinating.
All those lucky people get to see you and learn from you
Well,
and
it's
save their lives.
Amen.
yeah, and by the way, just when I spoke to some microbiologists
Mhm.
about this, I spoke to a couple who make sure they eat at least 20 different plants every single day. So the urgency and importance of this is pretty high. And if you eat Mediterranean, if you eat, gluten-free, if you eat, I mean, basically whatever diet plan you follow, or if you really just like to eat whatever you picked up at the market or whatever comes to your plate at Applebee's, this works along with that. You don't have to restrict anything. It works because it's about adding foods, not about cutting them out.
And also, it's a lot easier than people think. Just look at tea and coffee. Okay. There's two plants right there. Spices are another way to get them in.
Yeah.
Fruits.
And again,
vegetables.
it's just, mixing it up, having a mix of foods, putting plants into your favorite foods. Find a way to put new plants into pasta, put it on a pizza, put it into cereal, whatever you love to eat. Don't cut out what you love to eat, add to it so that you're making what you love to eat more nutritious. And by the way, if you love corn chips, make some guacamole. If you love, pita chips, get some tapenade. Get that extra. If you love to go to Buffalo Wild Wings, make sure you eat the crackers, the carrots and the celery that come with it. It's not being restrictive in any way. It's about adding to and improving the meals that we do eat.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, same.
So, Steve, thanks again. Really appreciate you being on the show and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Oh, I
Yes,
really
thank
appreciate
you.
it too. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of This Podcast Burns Fat. We're so excited to have you as a listener, and we're hoping that you really enjoyed the content as well. And if you did, please run over to iTunes and provide a rating and or review. It will go a long way in helping us continuously build our listenership up so that we can provide you with the excellent content regarding fat loss, weight management, and just an overall healthy lifestyle. Thanks so much. Have a great night.